How are you today? I'm hoping you're doing wonderful. It's been a wonderful day, a great weekend. I'm going to talk about the book of Daniel tonight. And what I'm going to do is just go through and pick out things that speak of the last days and the Antichrist. Now, Daniel has a lot of prophecies in it, and they have all come true up to this point. Daniel interprets dreams for Nebuchadnezzar and proceeds to tell him every empire that would come along after Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian Empire, and all the way up until the last days. And every one of those prophecies have come true until we get up to the point where we are now at the last days. So the only things we're going to talk about are the things concerning the last days. And we're going to talk about Daniel 7, 9, 10, 11, and 12, I think. And so I've made up a little chart with the highlights of those things, and then I'm going to read a few portions of Scripture as we get to them. So let's do that. I'm going to share my screen with you here. And make that just a little bit smaller and bring this over here, and I'm hoping you can see that. Let me zoom in one more time. There we go. Maybe that won't. Bear with me just a second. Okay. All right, so maybe you can see that. So in Daniel chapter 7, these are some of the highlights that we're going to talk about. And Daniel is speaking of the last beast that he saw that was for the period of what we would consider the last days. And he described this beast as terrifying, dreadful, and exceedingly strong. This is in Daniel chapter 7, and you can go to chapter 7 and find this in detail. Iron teeth, and the beast had 10 horns, and then there appeared a little horn that plucked up 3 other horns and basically destroyed the 3 horns. The little horn had eyes like a man and a mouth speaking great and bold things. Now, Daniel asked the angel, I believe, what this meant, and he explained to him. The little horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them until the Ancient of Days came. And the Ancient of Days we know is God. The 4th beast will be a 4th kingdom that will devour the whole earth and trample it down. 10 kings shall arise, and 1 little king will come and destroy 3 kings. So one thing I want to mention here is that there are some people who believe that the 10 kings will be the 10 leaders of 10 countries. And some people believe it is a revived Roman Empire. But I read something the other day that really made perfect sense to me. And I believe that it should be considered as a possibility of what the 10 kings might be. And this person believed that the 10 kings were not 10 leaders or kings of countries. That the word that is translated king could mean basically men of power. And if you stop and think about it, this entire planet, I believe, is controlled by a handful of very important, wealthy men. And that as the Antichrist takes over the world system, the 10 kings would be 10 powerful men And so I believe that is a possibility. We don't know for sure that it's going to be 10 countries of the revived Roman Empire, although that is a popular opinion, and it is possible. In Daniel chapter 9, here are some other things that refer to the last days in the Antichrist. And this says that the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And that would mean Jerusalem and the temple. The end shall come with a flood, and there shall be war and desolation. And these are summaries, not actual verses. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week. 1 week, we believe, means 7 years. And there's a lot of information to support that. And we're going to talk about some of them as we get to another point in chapter 12. And then it says, in the middle of the week, are the 7 years, he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering, and there will be abominations and desolations. Now, that word that says middle could also be half of the week. So it says, one translation says, for half of the week, he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. So that would kind of sound like it means for 3.5 years, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. Or it could begin at the middle of the week. So either way, whether it's middle or half, they both make sense. And it is speaking here to the temple of God. And that's why many believe that there will be a third temple built, because there will need to be a temple if the Antichrist is going to put an end to the offerings and sacrifice that are in the temple. And I've had a lot of people who are get a little bit out of shape about the whole another temple being built in Jerusalem, because they say that it is satanic, because the Antichrist is going to step foot in there and take over. So why are the Jews building it? Just so the Antichrist can step in there and do what he's going to do. But I think we should remember that the temple being built is extremely important to Israel and to observant Jews. And it's because, of course, we know that they don't recognize Jesus as the Messiah. But we have to remember God has blinded their eyes. They don't see him as the Messiah because God has placed that veil over their eyes. And they will recognize him. That veil will be removed and they'll recognize him at the end. But for now, they have been prevented by God from seeing this. There is a remnant of Jews who have seen it, but the majority of them do not see it because they cannot see it. So to them, the temple is extremely important because they want the Messiah. They are still waiting for the Messiah. And so they want to have a temple so God will live in their presence again and send the Messiah. So I don't think that we can blame them or be mean about the fact that they want to build a temple, because they're still looking for the Messiah. They still love God. There are many Jews who love God and try to follow his commandments, but their blindness is concerning the Messiah. And God will work that out with them when the time comes. It's not up to us to judge them for that. They are our brothers and sisters. And so we should pray for Jerusalem, pray for Israel, just as the Bible instructs us to. So let's go to Daniel chapter 11, and I'm going to read some of this for you, beginning with verse 21 through 45. Daniel chapter 11. Okay, verse 21 through 45. And so just listen to this explanation. Now, up to this point in Daniel chapter 11, Daniel is speaking of events that are going to take place, and we know that they did take place. So before we start in verse 21, we have to understand that he is also speaking about Antiochus Epiphanes, and who was a symbol or type of the Antichrist. So what Antiochus Epiphanes did take place. But I believe that we are in a period here called dual fulfillment, where what has taken place will be fulfilled again, only to a greater extent. So as you read through chapter 11, you will see that he is talking about things that have already taken place all the way up to verse 21. And then as we go from verse 21 through verse 40, I believe, it's still speaking of Antiochus Epiphanes, but it also is speaking of the Antichrist. And then starting in verse 40, it's speaking only of the Antichrist. So let's look and see what it says starting in verse 21. It says, "In his place shall arise a contemptible person to whom royal majesty has not been given. He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. And from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people. Without warning, he shall come into the richest parts of the province, and he shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. He shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time. And he shall stir up his power and his heart against the king of the south with a great army." Now, many people believe that this future king of the south could possibly be an alliance of Arab countries. Okay, "And the king of the south shall wage war with an exceedingly great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for plots shall be devised against him. And for the two kings, their heart shall be bent on doing evil. They shall speak lies at the same table, but to no avail, for the end is yet to be at the time appointed. And he shall return to his land with great wealth, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant, and he shall work his will and return to his own land." Now, I did want to say one thing that I learned just recently, and that is that when it speaks of the North King or lands to the north, in ancient Hebrew literature, a lot of times this referred to evil, to anything that was referred to from the north, many times meant an evil king or an evil army. "And at the appointed time he shall return and come into the south, but it shall not be this time as it was before. And he shall turn back and pay attention to those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple," just like it talked about in Daniel 9, about the abomination of desolation in the temple halfway through the week. "Shall appear and profane the temple and the fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering. And they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant. But the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. And the wise among the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by sword and flame, by captivity and plunder. And when they stumble, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery. And some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made white until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. So several times it says that he will seduce many with flattery. In other words, he will be a smooth talker. He will speak convincing words, and many will believe him. Verse 36, and the king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. So we are definitely speaking of the future Antichrist now. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what is decreed shall be done. In other words, he will get away with this until the time that God says it is over. The tribulation, the abominations and everything is done. But until then, the Antichrist will prosper. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers, or to the one beloved by women. Now, this is the place where some translations say that he does not like women. And I don't believe that's what it means. And the version that I'm reading does not say that that's what it means. It's telling that he does not honor the gods of many others. And I don't know what the one beloved by women, I don't know what that would be, or the gods of his fathers. But I do know that people have different opinions on what nationality the Antichrist will be. It is commonly taught that he will be of a European descent, and that goes along with the whole revived Roman Empire. There are people who believe that he is Muslim, which I find it difficult to believe that Israel would make a covenant with a Muslim. And there are people that believe he is Jewish, which would be more understandable for Israel to make a covenant with a Jew. And there are different areas of the Bible that kind of support all of these, so it just depends on what people believe. But it says here that he does not pay any attention to the gods of his fathers. So it is possible that he could be Jewish, but he does not, he has never been a religious Jew. He has never honored the God of Israel. And it says, he shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these. A God whom his fathers did not know, he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. He shall deal with the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. That's interesting. Those who acknowledge him, he shall load with honor. He shall make them rulers over many, and shall divide the land for a price. So it says that at first he will be popular with a few. He will, with a small group, and that he will deceive many with flattery and with the words of his mouth. And so for centuries, people have been on the lookout for an Antichrist figure that would come up, that would be very popular and schmooze everybody. And so just as an example, and of course there have been many ideas, some people have thought for sure this was the Antichrist. But now I'm going to say something that's going to sound a little outrageous, but I'm just using it as an example of what it could possibly be like. And that is President Zelensky, who I love. I admire him. I believe he is a true hero. But he is also a Jew. But he is a Jew who does not worship the God of his fathers. And look how, I'm not saying President Zelensky is the Antichrist. I'm using this as an example of how overnight a figure could pop up out of nowhere and win the world over. And this is what has happened with President Zelensky. Like, he is all of a sudden an international hero. He is admired and loved by so many people. And it'll be a miracle if he survives the assassination attempts on him. And supposedly in 2 weeks there's been a dozen assassination attempts. And I hang on every word he says. I mean, what he's doing is brave and courageous, and it obviously he loves his country and the people in his country. And so, but this is an example of how the Antichrist might just appear out of nowhere and win over the hearts and minds of the whole world. So, now I am not saying he is the Antichrist. Please know I'm using this as an example, although I'm not saying that he won't be. We just don't know. So, let's see. How far have I read? Let's start with verse 40. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, the king of the north, or the Antichrist figure. But the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind, with chariots and horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall come into countries, and shall overflow and pass through. He shall come into the glorious land. We assume that is Israel. And tens of thousands shall fall, but these shall be delivered out of his hand. Edom and Moab and the main part of the Ammonites. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall become ruler of the treasures of gold and silver and all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and the Cushites shall follow in his train. So these countries will just fall right in after him. But news from the east and the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. And he shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end with none to help him. So that is a lot of information on the Antichrist that we get out of chapter 11. Now let's look at chapter 12. And then it says, when that time comes, and we just read the description of what it's going to be like. When that time comes, Michael, the great prince who champions your people, Michael is the prince assigned to Israel, will stand up, and there will be a time of distress unparalleled between the time they became a nation and that moment. And I want to bring your attention to Revelation, and this is what the video is going to be on tomorrow, 11, 12, and 13. And here we see, in chapter 12, we see Michael intervene, and then Israel is taken to a safe place. So right here, Daniel says that Michael shall arise at that time, and that it will be a trouble like never before seen by the people, the nation of Israel, and never again will be seen. And it says, at that time, your people shall be delivered, those whose name is in the book. So we assume here that Daniel is referring to the book of life. Now let's see what Revelations, I have a note here for Revelations 21, 27. Let's read that real quick. It's talking about the new heaven and the new earth and the temple and the city. Nothing impure may enter it, nor anyone who does shameful things or lies. The only ones who may enter are those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. So I did a little bit of research on the book of life, and I found quite a bit of information, but the summary of what I found was that to ancient Israel, the book of life, those who were written in the book of life, were those who are faithful to God, faithful to God's commands. They were part of the family, the community, or the nation. And if they were not faithful to God and his commands, they were removed from the nation and from the book of life. And I believe that in our time now, it is the same thing. It is that you're not put in the book of life because you signed a little card that says, I profess my belief in Christ. It's those who are faithful to God and his commands. Those who don't have unrepented, willful, continual sin. Those who repent of their sin and have been redeemed by the blood are those whose names are in the book of life. So, then how is this meant to be understood? Because Israel will not have seen, they will not have had that veil removed from their eyes yet at this point. When Michael, at the halfway point, whenever the Antichrist, when the Antichrist enters into the temple and proclaims to be God and turns on Israel, I believe, according to what we're going to read in the next video, that Michael will make sure that Israel will be delivered and taken away in the desert to be kept safe. And that's what we're going to read about next time. But it says those whose name is in the book. And I believe that it will be those in Israel who have a heart for God and for the commands of God and to be faithful to God. Those are the ones who will be rescued. And then at the end of that period, they will see the Messiah and they will all be saved. So that's my take on Israel being delivered. Michael seeing to it that they are delivered, and we're going to talk about that in Revelation 11, 12, and 13. And then it says, the dead will rise, and those who are wise and turn many to righteousness shall shine in the sky. So it's talking about the very end. But you, Daniel, seal the book until the end. Daniel asked a question. He wanted to know more, and they said, nope, this is all seal up this book until the end, and knowledge shall increase. It says, many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. And I believe, that's why I believe that there are many things that we do not know from Revelation that people just kind of make up and manipulate to get it to fit their theology or their timeline. But I believe there are many things that are not discussed. There are many details that are left out, but we will know when it gets closer, and we need to know. Just like God gave the children of Israel enough manna one day at a time, I believe that as we get closer each day, he will reveal to us what we need to know. And the important thing is to just be faithful to him. Just be faithful and try to honor him with our life as much as we can. And Daniel asked, how long shall it be until the end of these things? And I'm going to read one more. I knew I shouldn't have closed up that notebook. Oh, it's not in the notebook, that's why. Daniel 8, 8 through 13. I gotta find Daniel again. That's what bookmarks are for. Here we go. So I think I'm going to Daniel 8. That's what my note says. We'll see. Daniel 8, 8 through 13. Let's see if I can see it good enough. Oh, no. I'm pretty sure it's probably Daniel 12, 8 through 13. Yep, that's what it is. All right. I heard this. Now, Daniel is talking about what he heard. And Daniel had asked, how long will these wonders last? Wonders. I don't think wonders is a good translation. I clicked on that in the Strong's, and it speaks of judgment or things that are beyond belief. It's not a wonder like we think wonder is. It's not wonderful. And so he said, how long will these things of judgment, these things that are hard to believe? Because there are times, as we read in Daniel, Daniel was like very distraught over what he saw. Very, very distraught. I mean, he didn't eat or drink for days. And so the man, he asked the question, how long will this last? The man dressed in linen, who was above the water of the river, raised his right and left hands toward heaven and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and a half, and that it will be when the power of the holy people is no longer being shattered, that all these things will end. I heard this, but I couldn't understand what it meant. So I asked, Lord, what will be the outcome of all this? But he said, go your way, Daniel, for these words are to remain secret and sealed until the time of the end. Many will purify, cleanse, and refine themselves, but the wicked will keep on acting wickedly, and none of the wicked will understand. But those with discernment will understand. From the time the regular burnt offering is taken away and the abomination that causes desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days. How blessed will be anyone who waits and arrives at the 1,335 days. But you go your way until the end comes. Then you will rest and rise from your reward at the end of days. So he gives Daniel some timelines. So he says, from the time of the abomination of desolation, hang on just a minute. So from the time of the abomination, desolation, from the time that the Antichrist does his thing in the temple, halfway through, will be, first he says, time, times, and half a time. So we believe that means 1 plus 2, which times is time twice, plus a half. So that would be 3.5. And the year-day thing, there are many places all throughout the Bible that give us an indication that it is proper to use the year-day thing. In Numbers 14 and 34, in Ezekiel 4, and there's another really good one that I didn't write down. So then he mentions 1,290 days. Now in Revelations 12 and 6, and then in verse 14 we see 1,260 days. So 3.5 years times 360 days, which is what it would have been then per year, that comes to 1,260 days. So that's how we know that the time times and a half a time really does mean a year, 2 years, and half a year. And then Daniel did mention 1,290 days, and people believe that is including a leap month that should be calculated in there, which would give another 30 days. And then it mentions the 1,335 days. How blessed will be anyone who awaits and arrives at the 1,335. So that's an extra 45 days. And I didn't research that a lot. I do know there are several different opinions, but people believe that we come to the end of that 7 years, or that there is a 45-day period where things happen. But that could be something we could go in separately at another time. But this just gives us proof that the time times and half a time means 3.5 years. And we're also going to see this mentioned in Revelations 13, where Michael rescues Israel, and it mentions again that time, and we also see a reference to this time when we're talking about the 2 witnesses. So it is no coincidence. All of these things are pointing to the same time period. So that is fascinating. So since we have this fresh in our mind, now we're going to go on to Revelations 11, 12, 13, and 14. And that'll be in the next video. And we'll talk about some of these things that we just learned about in Daniel, and it will all make sense, I hope. So thank you for listening, and I will see you on the next video.